to our monthly Aya brunch. We're thrilled that you're here. Aya stands for the Association for Young Astrologers, although we have a very broad and inclusive definition of young. Today, we're going to be exploring the tropical versus sidereal zodiac. So we're on a video conference, so there's just a few sort of ground rules. We're going to mute everyone. So Alex and Aaliyah, oh, Kenwin, it's great to see you. We're going to be muting everyone, so that way when Theo is talking, he can give his presentation. And then in terms of, it's a big call. We've got over 23 people right now, and more people will be jumping on. And so we're going to be doing questions in the text box, and then Theo can respond to those questions in turn. Theo has prepared a short deck of just a few slides, and you know, the goal is just to have a dialogue and a conversation. So we'll move forward, and yeah, we're excited that you're here. And if you have any questions that come up, just put them in the chat box. And we've got an international crew here, which is pretty exciting. So, all right.
That's good.
Yeah, right. And
yeah.
I am delighted to introduce Theodore
Naicker.
Naicker, all right, I'm really bad at pronunciation, who is an astrologer in Johannesburg. And Theo is really exciting because he has done in-depth mentorship in Vedic astrology and is sort of a top Vedic astrologer in the world. And he also has done his time with Western astrology and really understands that system as well. So he sort of has in-depth understandings of the way that both languages work, and he's going to help sort of us explore this really fascinating topic. So with that, I pass the baton.
Ta-da! Okay, so thank you, Aya and Alia, Danny, Alex, and Joe for this opportunity to speak to the global audience about this topic, because I think it's about time we kind of get together, and I guess the new generation of astrologers need to come together and kind of hold hands on this topic, because it is something I think that has to do with the future of where astrology is going anyway. So in that light, my background, as Danny said, is both in psychological Uranian astrology, and then medieval astrology and Persian astrology and all that jazz. And then consolidating that over time and done various kind of things with that over the years. And that's what I practice. But I'm also practicing Vedic astrology because I'm learning in a line, one of 5 families in India that maintain the astrological tradition over hundreds of years since before the Renaissance in Europe. So it's an oral tradition. So one of the initial things to say is that in an oral tradition, which the West also had before the decline of apprenticeships as a method of learning in the rise of universities, people learned the Iliad and Beowulf and the Odyssey by rote, the bards of Europe. So there's an oral tradition in terms of a method of learning and transferring knowledge from one generation to the next. And of course, each generation is going to add to that knowledge. So when it comes to Vedic astrology, which in this case has been an ongoing and unbroken oral tradition in this family for so long, what you're getting is so much more than what is available in the texts. Textual references and those kind of things, really, we need to know that even before we start learning. So that's like 20% of what can be known in such a tradition. So what I hope to share with you today is some of the insights given outside of what may be available in textbooks, or learning astrology online programs, those kind of things, which I think are fairly fundamental to understand. And it really, once I go into it, you'll understand, you'll see that it's really very simple. And I really don't understand why people get up in arms about it. I think part of it is we need to stop identifying ourselves with just one body of knowledge so tightly, because actually there's so much crossover, not in techniques, but in terms of the concepts underlying what we understand astrology is trying to do, not just in terms of predictive ability, but in terms of helping people get on with their lives on a practical level. So that's kind of where I want to get to. Now, the first, and yes, there will be questions on the chat, I suppose, and I mostly won't be paying attention to that, but Alex or Danny, just ping me or just tell me that there's questions going on, then I'll kind of go there. I just want to keep my train of flow going. So Danny, you want to start with that first? Do you do the share screen, or do you want me to do it? I prefer you did it, and I don't have to.
You want me to do it?
Yeah, please.
Cool. Hold on. Just bear with me here. Okay. Hi, everybody. Can everyone hear me? And so I was talking with Theo before the talk, and we wanted to try to show a really awesome image that would sort of encapsulate the sidereal and tropical zodiac in one image. And so I pulled up a deck that actually Rob handmade. Can everyone see that?
Yeah, it's up now.
Okay, great. So all right, I'll let you talk.
All right. So can everybody see that screen, that picture clearly? There's a lot of writing on it, but essentially you have the Earth in the center, surrounded by the 4 elements as they are conceived of in the Western system, and then you have and then you have the lunar sphere and the spheres of the planets according to relative speed as seen from Earth. Mercury, Venus. Yeah, okay, there we go, we're getting there. The Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. And beyond that, you can see both the zodiacs, the tropical zodiac. And I think at that time, the difference was 8 degrees or something like that. But it looks like it's not that much. But this was, I believe you said, Danny Petrus Apianus, 16th century German astrologer, mathematician, cartographer in Germany. So that's kind of it's taken up from his book, I suppose, this image. So you can see both the zodiacs superimposed on each other outside of that. And then there's the constellational zodiac at the very edge of the circumference. And so first thing to appreciate is that initially when people looked at the sky, usually it was at night time, and usually in most ancient cultures it was tracking the positions of the moon related to the stars. And there's no disagreement in terms of astrological practice in the beginning of these cultures was sidereally based, some of it constellational, and then once there's a sidereal zodiac coming into the picture, it also comes to that. In tropical astrology, the tropical zodiac is essentially emergent because of the seasonal nature of life on Earth. And then Ptolemy, with the discovery by Hipparchus of the precession of the equinoxes, and I think 100 years or 200 years after that, Ptolemy attributed the zodiac to the seasonal tropical system. So before that, just to be clear, and also in some of the Persian texts, you find where they are exposed to both Hellenistic streams of knowledge as well as those coming out of India. Yes, and there's a debate about what went to India and what happened there with that crossover link from Hellenistic Greece. And I don't want to go down that route because it gets a bit who did what first sort of conversation, which I find quite irrelevant to the practice of it. But there's a constellational zodiac, and none of the 2 zodiacs are constellational. That's the first thing to understand. And I suppose if you use techniques like parans, as Bernadette Brady has in the 90s and 2000s brought out with her work, with the Babylonian astrology, sort of visual astrology. That kind of speaks to that. In that system, it works fine. When I use parents in my work, even in horary, I'm referring to a constellational reference, okay, because I'm using the constellational zodiac. The constellational zodiac, oh yeah, Danny. The constellational zodiac is the apparent path of the sun through the actual constellations in the sky, as they are in terms of length of arc as seen from the Earth, as the sun moves around the Earth during the course of the year. Is that a okay definition? I'm not too good with definitions, you know, I just kind of skim them most of the time. So if anyone is still not sure about what I'm talking about, please let me know. I've gotten really quiet. Okay, that's better. Okay, so the constellational zodiac is the constellations themselves. Okay, the constellational zodiac in particular refers to the constellations that the apparent path of the sun passes through during the course of the year. There are many more constellations besides that, which are used in astrology, using parents and you know, things like that especially, which I use and I do find valuable as broad black and white brushstrokes over a chart. Yeah, so as you can see, to go into more detail on this slide, for example, Taurus is, and actually if you look at the sky maps, there's a huge gap between Aries, Pisces, which are kind of close to each other in the sky as constellations, and where Taurus and Aquarius are, okay? Because Aries and Pisces, even though Pisces is quite an extensive constellation, and it kind of crosses over into Pegasus and Andromeda a little bit, and Aries is quite a small constellation. Taurus is huge, you know, its ascensional horizon can take quite a long time on the eastern horizon, or even setting for that matter, so relative to seasons and latitude. But the point is the constellational zodiac has a different length, it's a different time-based system, it's a different archetype that you're looking at. And that is where the, you know, the study of ancient mythologies with respect to the constellations and the stories that they contain, not just as a Hellenistic reference, but even Mesoamerica and also India, even Chinese, you know, astrologer Rod Chang, sorry, you know, knows a lot about that. And my first teacher in Vedic astrology, Kenneth Johnson, who did a lot of work in Mesoamerica as well, you know, those are all very interesting and appropriate because we are ascribing meaning to what we are seeing in the sky, which is essentially at the heart of what astrology is trying to do, whichever system you're looking at. So that is the, yes, we're still on the first bit. That's the constellational zodiac, which is the first circle on the outside. So the point of this slide was to show that there's a constellational zodiac, there's a sidereal zodiac. Now the sidereal zodiac, obviously the term sidereal is a hint that it is tied to the constellational zodiac at one point, as an anchor. And there are different versions of this. People start off the sidereal zodiac at different places, or they choose to anchor it, sorry, more correct to say. They choose to anchor the sidereal zodiac using different stars for different purposes. So some use a star in Cancer, some use a star in Virgo, which is the tradition. Some use a star in Pisces. All of these are telling you something different about the setup, because you're anchoring it to the constellations in some way, and that carries some meaning. But I'm not going to go into that here. All we need to know is that the sidereal zodiac is separate from the constellational zodiac, but it is tied to the constellational zodiac at one stellar reference point in space. Okay. Now, the tropical zodiac is different from any of that. It is not tied to the sidereal or the constellations, at least directly, as an anchor point. But archetypally, some of the influences in astrological practice over the years have filtered through. So does everyone understand that there are three zodiacs we are talking about here and the basic difference between them? I'm going to talk about the tropical a little bit more over the next slide. The tropical zodiac essentially begins at the vernal equinox or the autumnal equinox, depending which hemisphere you are. And the anchor for the tropical zodiac is that first moment of spring. The days are equal and the nights are equal in length. Yes, the star that is traditionally used to anchor the Sidereal Zodiac is the star Spica, which is the yoga tara for the nakshatra of Chitra. But it's the star Spica. And I didn't know this before choosing my business name to be Spica Astrology, so maybe I was meant to go into Vedic as well. But it was interesting because I did not know that Spica was the star. And one of the reasons is it is the gift of the feminine. It is the feminine-driven wisdom as an architect for the sky. All right, it's not just a virgin, as we are commonly taught. It is the creator feminine in the heavens. So from that point of view, it is used as an anchor point because the fixed stars are seen as a sort of relatively unchanging masculine, and the constellational reference seen as a relatively unchanging masculine archetype upon which these two zodiacs are dancing. Okay, so the Sidereal Zodiac is an archetype feminine that is tied in a masculine feminine principle point of view to the constellations in a particular way. And the tropical has its own paradigm of masculine feminine. Now, getting into that a little bit more, we know in astrology, let me go to, is everyone with me? Any questions about that?
Then you muted.
Cool. All right. Okay. I'll just move on.
You've concluded by mentioning 3 zodiacs. I thought there were only 2.
Yeah, well, for most astrologers, there are only 2. Like I said, originally astrology was really just on the stars. And remember, the zodiac itself, if you physically look up into the sky, you're not seeing any zodiac as a band of some width or length out there in the heavens. That is all in your head.
I realize that.
Right. So the constellational zodiac. So, for example, the sun would take a really long time to pass through the constellation of Taurus.
Yeah, I realize that as well. So, where's the third?
Those are the 3: the constellational, the tropical, and the sidereal.
Right. The tropical is the Western astrology one.
We'll go with that for now. Yes, that is the one most commonly used in Western tradition of astrology.
And there's one where they just have the constellations the sizes they are, and that's the sidereal?
That is the constellational. That is mostly used when you read really ancient texts, and like you're doing Mesopotamian astrology research, where it's about the rising of certain stars on the horizon, the setting, the culminating, as connecting to the cross of matter. Though that's a different kind of use of the constellations and the constellational zodiac in that way.
And the third one then is
the sidereal, which is taking a fixed star from a constellation and from that point doing 30-degree equal segments.
So that's a sort of mixture of the first 2.
Yes, it's like an in-between paradigm, which is what I'm calling.
Right, I now see why I got confused. Thank you. Sorry.
My pleasure, no problem. As long as it's clear that there's 3. Correct, great.
I didn't realize there were 3. I thought there were only 2, the first 2.
Interesting. That's good. I'm sure there's a lot of people also that are able to talk the same thing. Right. So, and this is why I'm here, right?
I just want to make a quick comment, which is my dad and I have a long-standing joke that Virgo is obese. And this idea, I mean, I don't know how many of you have stargazed at night and looked at the sky a lot, but the constellations don't fit into neat 30-degree boxes. And so we have this idea, looking at paper, that the zodiac is this elegant, pie that's sliced into 30 degrees. But when you actually look out on the sky, I think Virgo is like, how many degrees is Virgo? Virgo is like 50 degrees, and Cancer is like 15 degrees. And so both the sidereal zodiac and the tropical zodiac are abstractions.
Yes.
And they're different abstractions that have different
Mhm.
philosophical motivations for that abstraction. And
Right.
the only other thing why Theo and I wanted to show this particular manuscript is that Western astrologers have used multiple zodiacs in the past.
Mhm.
This idea that the tropical is Western and that the sidereal is Eastern or Vedic. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit, Theo. Because I think that's
Yeah, we come into that. We come into all of that. We come into those wonderful stories. So, actually, I think I'm going to.
Just to finish that point, in which case, if you're anchoring it to a fixed star and then doing the same thing of turning it into only 30-degree sections, it's incredibly important which star you're fixing it to.
Correct, correct. And this is a point of discussion in the sidereal system, where if you're taking a purely academic views, and by that I mean mostly people that are not studying in a Vedic astrology tradition, it becomes debate riddled with academic and textual references that actually don't go anywhere. Because it becomes removed from the mythological references, becomes removed from the deeper reasons for, well, we are choosing to create a zodiac, because actually we have chosen to create a zodiac as human beings. Okay. And there's, as you've correctly pointed out, there's a very good reason for that. And therefore we have a context for what zodiac we are using in sidereal astrology, but for the most part, we are using one that uses Spica as the 0 point of Libra. Okay, so, but I don't want to go into that discussion yet.
No, but that's very clear now. Thank you.
Yeah.
And a very important thing.
Yes, very, very important. Very important.
Theo, can we just answer a few other questions that have come up here? We've got.
Let's see. Okay, so Esther Anderson, I will come to that question at the end. Just remind me, okay? Just remind me. There's a lot to say. And actually on my website, on the webpage about Spica, there's a whole page on my homepage about what Spica is about. If you research Spica as a star, there's so many star myths from various cultures about this. So you can take any one of them. But from the Vedic tradition, yes, when we come to the Nakshatras, I will say something about that, sure. Danny, I think I'm going to share my screen now because I want to use the pointer.
Go for it.
Cool. Let's see, share screen. I think you have to stop sharing first. Is that possible? Okay, there we go. Okay, cool. So let's see here. Let's start with that. Okay, so share screen. All right, let me know when it comes up on your side.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So this is the same sort of pictorial. I've just made it a little bit simpler and maybe easier to read for some people. But you can see that it's the same. Well, this is not strictly the same model used in Vedic astrology, but for a point of familiarity, I'm going to be using it, okay, as the archetype of the planetary spheres, and the eighth one, so the Earth, there's the sublunar sphere here, the Moon sphere, Mercury sphere, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and then the fixed stars, and apparently then the divine, okay. So the first thing I want to talk about is this paradigm of light. When you practice astrology for a long time, you just start seeing charts as light, in the different shades of light. Okay, pun not intended, but different shades of light. And so the most simple of that is the phases of the moon. Those different shades of light have a particular meaning, both from a progression point of view and a natal applying, separating, from a horary point of view, the translation of light. At the core of astrology is a dialogue of light between an individual and whatever archetypes you're choosing to look into. Then you have the year, so the tropical system, which focuses on the light of the sun, the quality of the light of the sun, the strength of the light of the sun from a seasonal perspective, or at least attributed by Ptolemy in the northern hemisphere as a seasonal perspective. But that paradigm of the equal hours of day, equal hours of night, it's also equal amounts of light and equal amounts of non-light that becomes important. So the equinoctial points and the solstitial points become important references as turning points and milestones in the tropical paradigm of light. All right? Now, when it comes to the sidereal, you have the same paradigm of light, but now we're looking at, well, the dark and the light of the constellations. And in this context, for the sake of this session, focusing the star Spica as the rooting point, we would have tried to have rooted the Sidereal Zodiac near the constellation of Aries. But the constellation of Aries is actually quite a very dark place in the sky, if you've looked out into it. But opposite of that, we have this huge light that is the star Spica. So there's also a paradigm of light and dark happening from a sidereal point of view. That is, people have chosen to use that as an anchoring point as well. So what I'm trying to say here is that essentially as astrologers, our medium of interpretation is light. And that light is being channeled or being held or being translated by any number of objects in the sky and how we choose to use that. Okay, it depends on whatever system of astrology you choose to practice. But at the heart of it is a consciousness of light. And that is why in most texts, whether it's Vedic or whether it is traditional Western, you are exhorted to abide in the light and to align with the light, your own light as a practitioner and all these kind of things. So there's a lot of reasoning and I think cohesiveness in the system, no matter which system you subscribe to. That's the first thing I want to mention. The second thing is, following from that, on this diagram, it's important to understand where the zodiacs are. So we're not going to talk about the constellational zodiac from now on. I'm just going to focus on the sidereal zodiac and the tropical zodiac. So can you see my red little dot here? Cool. So the tropical zodiac is created by the sun's apparent path around the earth. So the tropical zodiac lies on the ecliptic, which is the path of the sun. So the tropical zodiac exists in this portion of the sky. Number one. The sidereal zodiac, because the sun is creating the seasons, around as the earth goes around the sun in the course of the year. So the tropical zodiac is very much created and sustained by the archetype of the sun's light as a solar individual consciousness here. Now, the sidereal zodiac is tied to a constellational reference frame. So the sidereal zodiac is out here. So the sidereal zodiac is not meant to be tied to seasons because it's not the way it's designed. Okay, so people using that as an argument for its invalidity is kind of ignorant because it's not meant to be seasonal. All right, it's following a different archetype. Now, the sidereal zodiac then is also closer to the 8th sphere of the stars and closer to divinity, etc., etc. So basically, the sidereal zodiac is imbibing a quality of a starlight paradigm. That's easy to understand. The tropical zodiac, which is within the solar system, remember the sidereal zodiac is not in the solar system. It's at the level of the fixed stars, okay? Which are different solar systems in their own right, okay? The tropical zodiac is within the solar system, so it's a localized light consciousness, and it is a paradigm of sunlight. So do people get that? We're talking about two kinds of light here, and the different division of that we are choosing to have. That's the first thing to understand. So when someone says in the tropical system, let's see what the chat is on about. Are they questions? I can't see. Yes, cool. Okay. So in the tropical system, therefore, the planets, their positions in space are projected onto the ecliptic. So when you say, I mean, those of us who are familiar with the astronomy of astrology and the celestial sphere mechanics, we know that when you say Jupiter's rising, you usually mean the projection of Jupiter's position in space onto the ecliptic has reached the horizon, the local horizon, somewhere in the east, okay? That's technically what it is. But there's also the in mundo position of Jupiter, which is his actual position rising in the east, okay? And that has led to primary directions and secondary progressions, and the difference between the two. One is circumstantial and one is emergent, okay? Secondary motion is emergent and primary motion is circumstantial. So that is within the tropical system, and it's fine. So the word used for these objects in the sky, at least the 7 ones that reflect the light of the sun, which is why we care about them the most, okay, because there's a level of awareness linked to them, okay, is that they are wanderers on the ecliptic. So the word used for them from the Greek is planet, all right? So when you're saying in the tropical system that Saturn is going through Sagittarius, you're kind of saying Saturn is kind of wandering through that part of the zodiac, or that part of the sun's quality of light in the year, which we are calling a Sagittarius. Yeah, so Gemini, that is the difference between the constellational zodiac and the constellations, correct. And I'll talk about Orion when I come to the mundane example that I have. Because what just happened in Syria is a very nice example to illustrate the difference between the two systems. So again, coming back to the tropical system, planets are called wanderers. That's what they mean. They're wandering along the ecliptic, which is the individual consciousness path of the sun. Okay. Now, in Jyotish, first of all, it's not really should be called Vedic astrology. That was a term invented in the 1980s when there were astrology associations set up in the USA. The traditional word for it is Vedanga Jyotisha. So Jyotish means the study of light, or the movement, or the understanding of light. And that is essentially what astrology is, okay? So in Jyotish, the Sidereal Zodiac is out here. It's a starlight paradigm, first of all. So that should tell you that when you say Venus is in tropical Taurus, it's not the same as saying Venus is in sidereal Taurus. Because one is out here light years away from where the tropical Taurus is sitting in the sky, okay? So that should be very clear. They are not saying the same thing, and nor do they need to be saying the same thing. And this is what I find people, when they're moving from one to the next, they get really into this existential crisis and intellectual crisis about, because they're trying to make everything the same, but that's not how life is, okay? Life is variegated, and that's how it should be. So the Sidereal Zodiac is out here. It's a paradigm of starlight. So from that point of view, from the perspective of Earth, the planets, what we are calling the planets, they are not travelers on the zodiac. They're nowhere near the Sidereal Zodiac, okay? So the word used for planets in Jyotish is called graha. Comes from the word called grahana. Grahana means that which blocks or seizes something. Like you hold on to something, you're catching something, okay? And you can understand why they chose that as a conceptualization of the planets, because the planets, they are blocking the starlight archetype of the Sidereal Zodiac. They're not wandering along it, as happens in the tropical system, okay? So the archetype of the zodiac is different between the two systems, and now you understand how. And the conceptualization of the planets and the signs is also essentially, and I mean that in the terms of essence, essentially different. Because the planets in Vedic astrology are seen as seizing your starlight, which is kind of where you're coming from in that context, and even in the Hermetic context. And because of that seizing and blocking and modifying in a certain way, they are individualizing and modifying you. What you end up knowing you as sunlight becomes something, right? But there's this whole other side of you that is being blocked, and that's what you're trying to navigate back to starlight, okay? Through these different karma implications, if you believe in karma, you know, that sort of thing. So it fits that mythological, social, cultural, religious, philosophical model, just as the tropical has become something that suits the Western Hermetic model as well. But at the heart of it, you can understand that there are two different ways of seeing the same thing happening, and that you are coming down from somewhere and something is being modified in some way, okay? Everybody with me? Cool. So I really get exasperated when people say, oh, but now my sun sign is this and that can't be right. And look, guys, it's not the same sun sign. It's not even a sun sign in Sidereal, okay? In that way. It's a different kind of sunlight sign, but it's not quite that way, okay? But, okay, so that's one thing I want to make clear. Now, moving on from that, are there any questions? Let's see. The rulership scheme. Okay, Syria, I'll come to. Just remind me, this is, even though the planets are seen as different as you described, yeah, the rulership scheme is not the same, actually, because in Vedic astrology or Jyotish, we also have rulership schemes of the nodes, which are thoroughly explained and explored. For example, the sign Aquarius is ruled by the North Node, which is called Rahu. Rahu and Ketu as the North Node and the South Node in Jyotish exist here at the beyond the zodiac, Sidereal Zodiac, out here. They do not exist down here because Rahu as the North Node is seen as the first Caesar, the prime Caesar of you. It has caught you into this paradigm and then you're forced down. So it really is a head that eats, okay? It's not a fancy, yes, it has a good, it makes you a good researcher if it is strong in your chart according to the rules in Jyotisha, but it's kind of like how a scientist would, you know, let your family member be killed just for the sake of an experimental observation. It's very kind of cold like that. If you think Saturn is cold, well, Rahu is like refrigeration, nitrogen, in terms of quality, if you want to have some sort of humoral thing to compare it to, okay? So it's a deeper aspect of Saturn. So yes, there's this thing which is different from the West tradition where they say the North Node is a point of increase. It's a point of increase of what? And what does that increase do to you? You know, so it's increasing good and increasing bad, but it's then what you do with it. But at the end of the day, it's an increasing of an attraction point to draw you into the system, and then you're trapped in the system. At least that's the philosophy of it, okay? And I'm not going to go with mythology about it. I wrote a long article on my website about it. Was called a demon called Bhanu and what that means from the derivation of the Sanskrit sounds. And people can go read that if they want to have more detail. But it's definitely something different from like evolutionary astrology, which is it's a different kind of context. Okay, there was a question up there about Syria. So we've had these missiles launched on the 14th of April, 2018, causing damage in Damascus, and kind of came out of the blue. And I pay attention to astrology forums on Facebook because you can see where people's minds are at and kind of get a sense of where the Vedic astrologers with this and where the tropical astrologers with this. And I'm very fascinated by how minds are seeing the same thing in such a different way and coming up with this so-called making up same justifications for the same event happening in the world. There's been a talk on the tropical side, this Mars at a midpoint. All of a sudden, the midpoint becomes a very important thing. Whereas, in other mundane astrology, it's something else, So midpoint was raised between Saturn and Pluto, Saturn and Mars, I can't remember which one it was. And Goritza Swartson on the traditional Hori astrology page put up the chart of Damascus the moment that the missiles were received there. And I think it was SJ or Gemini said that the star Betelgeuse was in the IC. And in her experience as a tropical astrologer, she found that Betelgeuse was Betelgeuse. That's how I choose to say it, as a star in the arm of Orion, is prevalent in sort of destructive charts. Now, I found that very interesting because when you come to the Vedic system, the star Betelgeuse is in a nakshatra lunar mansion of the sky called Ardra, which is ruled by the deity Rudra, which is of very destructive quality. And so I found that, well, that's saying the same thing. And the Vedic astrologers who knew that would understand exactly what Betelgeuse and why it is that way. Okay, the constellation Orion in the sky, for those doing Vedic astrology, it is not Orion, it is Rudra. Okay, so this is the destructive aspect of Shiva, for those of you who know the archetypes in Hinduism. So there's that. But from a sidereal point of view, on the 14th of April 2018, the sun moved into sidereal Aries. That's a big jump, because moving from the end of Pisces to the end of Aries in the Sidereal Zodiac is called Gandanta. It is a burning point of destruction. To cross over the fire-water sign boundaries in the Sidereal Zodiac is a big thing. It's a big deal, okay? Especially when the sun has to do it. So going through the Aries ingress in Sidereal Zodiac is a very big thing, not because it's starting a season, but because it is ending a cycle. Okay, so going into a sign of Mars, sidereally, on the 14th of April, the day before the new moon, which carries a destructive quality in Vedic astrology called Amavasya, which is very high material energy, very low spiritual impetus. In terms of starlight quality, but also which the moon is translating by its phase. Also, this happened when the ruler of the sidereal Aries ingress was in Sagittarius. Mars is in sidereal Sagittarius. Now, Sagittarius, even in tradition in the West, is a sign for war. If you talk about the Babylonians, the constellation of the Centaur it's about going to war. It's a mobile war machine. That's what a horse with an archer on top of it was in those days. And so you have Mars, the ruler of the Aries ingress, sidereally speaking, in the sign, and Sagittarius in Jyotish, in terms of places, is a battlefield. That is the description of the sign. So that's very clear what is happening on the 14th of April. And also Sagittarius, with the missiles, it's all the arrows of Sagittarius. So, and the reason why Sagittarius, you might think, well, it's a sign of Jupiter. What the hell does it have to do with going to war? Well, people only go to war when they believe they are right. So it's a different way of looking at even the signs, you see. It's not this reckless, fun-loving Sagittarius thing that is used at least the modern tropical astrology, personality type archetype, okay? But I urge people to look at both sides, because it was very clear in the Vedic, and you find the tropical astrologers talking about midpoints and Capricorn being a very focused Mars energy, like imbecile. That's all fine. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying that there are 2 ways of looking at it, right? Aquarius, you don't agree Aquarius is cold. Sure. It's a humanitarian sign. For people that tell me that Aquarius is humanitarian sign, yes, I suggested them to get 2 Sun in Aquarius people and put them into the same room and tell them to figure out a solution for a problem. And tell me how long it takes. The idea with Aquarius, they're humanitarian driven. It's a political mindset. So they know what is useful for society to optimize the system. But I wouldn't say it's humane. Yeah, I don't want to go into the discussion, but there's a difference between the 2 zodiacs. The signs are not the same. The Aquarius is a man with a pot near his head. So in Vedic astrology, Sidereal Zodiac, that portion of the sky, we're saying there's water in the head, which is clouded judgment, which is narcotics and drugs and big pharmaceutical companies. The sign is ruled by Rahu, the North Node in Jyotish, because it is what is ruling the world from that humanitarian, I suppose, point of view. Like Facebook is also good for communication, but it's also taking all your data on the side, right? It's humanitarian, sure, but I don't want to argue that point because we all are able to have our own interpretations of things. I'm just telling you that that is the perspective of Aquarius, the man holding a pot. And you see this in iconography in the Hindu religion everywhere. Shiva's got a pot that he's holding with water, and that is the Aquarius sign. But anyway, not to go into that. Yes, it's very theoretical. They're not going to hold somebody's hand necessarily when they're crying. Okay, so where was I? Syria, signs. Just to point out something that's very kind of simple as a very basic thing. Why is Aries a ram? Why is the sign Aries a ram? Why did they choose to initiate zodiac, whichever zodiac, with Aries of all animals, with a ram of all animals? If people go with, well, I've heard things like in springtime, the rams have to, use their horns to go through the snow to find the roots. And like, what about the rest of us in the southern hemisphere? At that time in autumn, we don't have rams digging through the snow. So that can't be it. I've also gone into looking at the golden fleece. Maybe there's something there with that story. I'm trying to find reasons for very basic things in astrology that maybe we're just taking for granted, why Aries is a ram. But then you also find that in ancient Egypt, there was a deity, a creator deity called Khnum. And Khnum was a god that had a ram's head. And you also find in Jyotish, there are creator gods that have a ram's head as well, or a goat's head. So there's something there to do with creating energy, I suppose. I mean, I don't know for sure, but it's just interesting to do this cross-cultural sort of study to see, well, maybe that's why. But also in Jyotish, the planets are considered, I will use the word deities, but that's not actually what they are. That's not actually what the word deva means. But anyway, the deity Mars, his vehicle is a ram. So when we say Aries is a ram, it's showing that this is the mobile aspect of Mars. It's the movable aspect of Mars. And it is a movable sign from that point of view. It's not movable in terms of its changing season. That is valid in the tropical system. In the sidereal, it is valid because it is a movable sign of Mars, because it is Mars on the move, literally. Okay, so I just wanted to point that out in case people are, this modality story, the modalities in the tropical zodiac are tied to changing of the seasons. But in the sidereal, the modalities, the signs, as I had in that article I shared on the event page, has to do with the changing and turning of sattva, rajas, and tamas, which are not in Western tropical astrology. And there are qualities of they're basically different equilibrium factors. What is disturbing equilibrium? As you're coming through the star system, how is that equilibrium being disturbed? Okay, so changeable signs, they're not called cardinal signs in Jyotish, they're called movable, chara, which means they move quickly. And they are turning points in terms of rajas, they're creative, the initiating. The fixed signs are tamas because they resist any modification, and they are repleting, rejecting, abandoning sort of energy, centripetal energy. And the dual signs are sattvic because they are doing both. They're not doing both in terms of transition between seasons, that is valid in the tropical system. In Jyotish, the transition is between rajas and tamas. The transition in the dual signs as sattva is bringing things into equilibrium. Okay, so in that sense, in the Jyotish system, it is the dual signs that are strongest in terms of force, because they can adjust and adapt to any situation in that way. They know when to turn tamas on and when to turn rajas on. So it's a different, the strength qualifications are different for the signs. The meanings of the signs are actually from the constellations. For example, it's even, the divisions of the signs are taken very seriously in Jyotish from a constellational point of view. For example, the sign, let's go, the simple one, the sign of Aries is a ram, but it is rising backward. It rises backward first. Okay, so the first 10 degrees of Aries is the fastest moving part of the mind, right? The middle part of Aries is the strength. It's like a wrestler energy, the wrestler Mars, okay, on a physical level. And the last 10 degrees of Aries is where the head of the ram is. So that is the most intelligent part of the sign, okay? So people born with the first 10 degrees of Sidereal Aries very strong in the chart, so they may be very good runners, for example, okay? Ashwini Nakshatra. Bharani Nakshatra, which is the middle portion of Aries, is about the physical strength, And then the last part of Aries, where the ram's head is Kritika, which is about the critical nature of the mind, to discern and cut, do the Mars action with your mind. So like that, studying both systems, you understand and you appreciate, well, this is where these divisions are coming from. And that is what a lot of the Persian texts say. Al-Biruni in his book on Reasons explicitly says that, he says that Ptolemy's attribution of the tropical to the astrological system was misguided. I don't know if that's true, because it works, okay? But it shows at that time, even in the 8th or 9th century, they had both tables of tropical and sidereal positions, and Al-Biruni in his book says, okay, for finding the seasons in the calendar, use the tropical, but then actually for judgment, use the sidereal, -8 degrees, which was the difference between the two zodiacs at that time. But what I would like to say about that is that, yes, whether Ptolemy was correct or not in attributing the seasonal to an astrological, the seasonal is everyone has used the seasons for setting up a calendrical system of solar months of the year. In Jyotish, we have used, but everyone agrees that astrology initially was sidereal. So, and you can go and look at Julius Caesar's stuff when he was Pontificus Maximus, high priest, not high priest, but the priest in Rome, and changed the calendar and all that jazz. They were aware that there's a tropical calendrical system and there's an astrological system. Now, Ptolemy attributed the seasonal calendrical system to say, well, at this point in time, it seems to be coinciding in our history. So just use it as astrological as well. And that's fine. Whether he meant it to be that way or not, we don't know. We know that Ptolemy did invent a lot of other things as well, terms and other things that we're not really sure why and where it comes from. But the point I'm trying to make is that even if, like the hardline Vedic astrologists point to that event and say, that was incorrect and there's the problem. But my point is that, well, even if it was incorrect, since then, human minds have applied themselves to that zodiac archetype for astrological purposes and have come up with techniques that do work. So what is the problem, right? So I'm at this point where there is a tropical zodiac and there's a sidereal zodiac. The systems are quite different. And they should be understood that way without trying to conflate the two and trying to draw boundaries in the sand too much. Because it's really apples and oranges when you come to think about it. Yes, the rulerships are the same, but they're also not the same because the planets are conceived of differently. The signs are conceived of differently. We do not have detriment in Jyotish. There's no such thing. But there is fall, which is the main debilitation. But in Jyotish, we also have factors that cancel out debilitation completely. So you have negation of debility happening in Jyotish. You have, it's a different, there are different relationship systems between the planets in Jyotish that say, okay, when planets are sitting together, they act a certain way. When one is translating light to another, then they have a different outcome. So there's different schemes of sambandha, or how the planets get along when they do various activities together. How awake a planet is. Is it sleeping? Is it a dream state? Is it awake? How, when it's doing its work, how focused is it? There's all these schemes that are there, which are not in the Hellenistic system at all. Okay, so I also don't agree with it all came from Greek. I don't agree with that because the testimony of the techniques really is way like a whole other level. Okay, and even if there was some crossover, it doesn't make anyone better than the other. That's my point. I don't understand why people have to know what the first car was. The first car wasn't the best car we ever had. So I would like to see astrologers come to a point where we can coexist with these two systems. There's this one thing I do want to explain though. SJ, yeah. So they are both. And that's why, I'm using both because I don't see a problem. If I'm working in tropical now, I know what paradigms I'm looking at. I know what contextual references I'm dealing with in interpretation, and I'm not trying to mix up things. And I think that's where a lot of bad astrology comes in. I'm learning in the tradition using a particular format of setting up the Sidereal Zodiac. So I'm sticking to that because over hundreds of years in this tradition, we have used this reference for the Sidereal Zodiac. And within that context, these techniques have emerged. So, but I'm aware that it's a shifting scale, it's a sliding paradigm. So if a client comes to me with a real soul existential crisis problem, I go straight into Vedic because it's on a starlight level of operation. And I can look at past life things and understand those kind of dynamics, where things are coming from at a root level. If someone talks to me about, I want to be more empowered with my decisions are and my environment, I'll go to a tropical. Actually, let me just mention that point because it's important. So the original view from the Vedic tradition is that, yes, we have both zodiacs there too. Just like how Robert Hand has discovered the Babylonians had both the zodiacs too. We've used both the zodiacs in Jyotish. But the tropical zodiac, because remember, it is a sunlight paradigm within the local solar system, the view, it's called the Sayana, right? Sa-ayana, right? And the Sidereal is called Nirayana, right? Narayana. But one is within the solar system, so it is showing you. So the Vedic view of tropical zodiac is it is showing natural processes on Earth. Yes, take seasons, weather forecasting. That's what we use the tropical zodiac for in Vedic astrology. But also, and this is a point where I am adding a point to that, is to say the tropical zodiac shows you that part of you, or how your behavior and dynamic with the environment is when you are conditioned by external nature the most, just like animals are, right? Because it's a sunlight paradigm, it's a seasonal context within which you're trying to operate. It's about the postnatal factors on your determination, the environmental factors of external nature, limiting what you can do. It's kind of showing me that negotiation happening. That's my opinion about it at the moment. Okay, I'm not saying that is the truth.
Hey,
but that's what I use to just make sense of it in my mind. Although there are techniques in tradition in the West about el mutum figuris and the soul and mana, and those, mana with a capital M and all those principles, they're also there. So I'm not saying that, I'm talking about Plato's Republic and the Phaedrus. And sure, there is something to that in the West as well. But I'm just giving you a different perspective. So this is the perspective from Vedic astrology. So they take the Sidereal Zodiac starlight reference as well. This is you without as your inner nature having more of a predominance over the external nature. Okay, so it is like saying, yes, human beings have been conditioned by nature, but we've invented fire. We've gotten over our natural limitations. Okay, so there's a part of us that is inner nature driven, and there's a part of us that is external nature modified. And that's kind of where I'm at the moment with the two systems. But it's something I cannot prove. It's something I cannot find an explicit reference for. So it's something that's always evolving, just tickles my mind constantly, moving between charts, working with people. In the chat, there's some questions or something. Oh. Yes, Daniel, let's look at the questions.
Okay, is it okay if I talk? Because I can zoom up fast. Okay, just bear with me here. Okay, I'm just gonna
just
do
go.
the questions in order. So, SJ had a question about Spica. Just because we only have half an hour left, do you want to just quickly talk about? He says, Ptolemy says that Spica is of the nature of Venus and somewhat of Mars. It's interesting you describe Spica as embodying the feminine. I'd be interested to hear more about Spica from the ancient Vedic tradition.
Okay, I'm going to keep it short. So, Spica, this is the Nakshatras as I've depicted them. And remember, the zodiac that you're seeing here is the Sidereal Zodiac, which is beyond the solar system. Okay, just keep that in mind. In this nakshatra here at the bottom, the 14th nakshatra in this scheme is called Chitra, which means a pearl, or a kind of even like a mark, painting, like you're constructing something, like when you make your initial plans to do something, that's like Chitra, it's like a ray. It also means ray, incidentally. But it's ruled by an archetype called Tvashtar, which is Savitra Aditya, which is a form of the sun that is to do with creating things. It's a creative energy of the sun, of the cosmic sun. Obviously, we're not talking about the solar system sun here. Okay, we don't know where that sun is. The Vedic texts say that our solar system has a polar twin that is rotating around. Whether that's the galactic center or something else, we don't know yet. But that's kind of the philosophy behind it. So this Chitra star has this kind of architect vibe about it. So Spica is not just about oration and the gift of the feminine for those arts from a feminine principle. From a masculine principle in the Vedic, we're saying, well, it's about creating something from that as a foundation. The feminine is giving you the foundation energy, and Tvashtar Aditya as an archetype is creating something with that. And in this context, is creating the zodiac. Does that make sense? A very short and sweet thing. Any other questions there, Danny?
Yeah, I got more. I'm going to be my moon in Virgo, and I'm just going to go through and make sure that we get what everyone said. Gemini Brett had a quick question, which we could spend 4 hours answering, but maybe just a quick answer, which is, why do you feel there are 12 signs?
So from the Vedic point of view, there are 12 solar archetypes. And they have nothing to do with the solar months of the year. They have to do with the 12 rays of the sun. To do with the 12 forms of rajas together, 3 forms of rajas, 3 forms of sattva, and 3 forms of tamas. Okay, some of them are ruling the nakshatras, as Luna mentions, but that is basically why there are 12 signs. And I just want to talk about the Nakshatras, actually, if I may, because that is the main thing in Vedic astrology that people talk about. Okay, first of all, the elements. In the Western tradition, the elements, there are 4 of them, fire, earth, air, water. They're all contained below the lunar sphere. They're between the moon sphere and the earth sphere. That is the paradigm, okay? But in Jyotish, the elements are beyond the stars. The elements are creating the stars. And there are 5 elements. There's fire, earth, and water, but there's also space. Obviously, you can understand why space is an element in Vedic astrology, because we are actually closer to the extent of space. Okay, it cannot be ignored, right? And this article in the event page I made an article about this in quite detail. And how the planets have to do with the 5 elements in particular as well. The seasons, so the 4 tropical seasons based on the sun's movement through equinoctial and social points are created at this level and have impact on the earth, okay, describing earthly events, physical phenomena. The sidereal seasons are obviously not at that level, they are at the stellar level. So we're not talking about terrestrial seasons. We're talking about seasons of the mind, okay? And there are 6 of them. So instead of having a season consisting of 3 solar months, tropically, we are in the Jyotish tradition, there are 6 sidereal months made up of 2 lunar months each. And each of those 6 sidereal lunar seasons correspond to a particular visible planet, except for the sun.
Okay, great.
So it's a different thing. Then I've talked about the nodes and the elements. I'll skip that. And the nakshatras.
But one more question,
yes.
Theo. I'm just trying to get through the questions that people ask. Yes. SJ had a question about the sun as a malefic.
Yes, that is true. What is the question? Why is it a malefic?
He just said the sun is a malefic in Jyotish and just wanted you to quickly address that concept.
Okay. So the sun archetype, as I said, all the planets in Jyotish are seizers or blockers of influence of starlight. So the sun as the archetype of king follows the rule of law to an exact degree. And if you're ever in the presence of some of those leaders, it's like a reverse psychology situation. You get manipulated in the power plays that are happening there, if you're ever working with people at that level or meeting them. Secondly, the king, as we know through combustion, you can't really get close to the king unless you're really Kazimi. And that is something dealt differently in Jyotish, but it is there. The sun is a malefic. In the Western tradition, the sun is malefic by conjunction or opposition. We understand that from tradition just very simply and quickly. And in Jyotish, the sun is malefic because it is of a Rajasic nature. It is to do with the fire element. Okay, so it is about creating, but it's creating of its own self. So it's going to use whatever is around it to create and emphasize its own light. So it's very harsh. So Leo in the tropical zodiac may have different interpretations in terms of creativity, generosity, warmth, personality, and all of that, as a lighter personality within natural environmental system. But from a Jyotish perspective, the sign of Leo is quite a harsh sign. So in Vedic astrology, wherever Leo is in the chart, you experience that sort of harshness from those people through those circumstances, because it's almost like, say, I have maybe Leo on my 6th house in my birth chart in Jyotish. So in my work environment, I experience the distance and harshness from colleagues. I don't have like a work relationship with my colleagues. You got to keep your distance with those people. So and also environmentally, if you're in India and you sit in the sunlight, the sun is malefic, okay? It's not a nice and easy day in the sun in India. So both from an environmental point of view, but culturally and archetypally, the sun is quite harsh. It cares about the rule of law. It's very unemotional. That's the moon's job. Okay, so the sun in Vedic astrology cares about following dharma, which is what you're here to do. And it's pretty uncompromising from that point of view. Anything else?
Yes. Leonie I love the segue from Leo to Leonie, and I apologize if I mispronounced that name.
Yeah.
There's a question here, but I'm just going to read it out loud. I think this is part of the problem where we try to align the meanings, signs, etc., between the tropical and sidereal, as in
Correct.
a tropical definition and a sidereal question or answer. They have different meanings and applications in each zodiac, right? So you have to pick one for an answer rather than mix them.
Absolutely correct. Gemini, while it may be two people, which in the Western tradition is twins, okay, in Vedic, they are man and woman in sexual embrace. So and therefore, Gemini in Vedic is a very fertile sign, but in Western it is infertile and barren. So you have to respect the system as it is, because even though things may look the same, they may be called the same. Actually, they're not, because I'm not using the Vedic names for the signs here, okay? But this is why I think people are starting using tropical zodiac with Vedic astrology techniques, because they haven't gone to study actually what the Vedic astrology is. What are the archetypes? Why the planets different? Why the signs different? So they are used to a tropical training that they're used to, and therefore applying the Vedic techniques gives them more detail. Great. That's a testament to the Vedic techniques more than their capability, I would say. But it is, so I would advise people, if you want to choose one, you don't have to be crazy like me, but choose what suits your paradigm of life and light, and use that to help people. But if you're doing a crossover thing, please be respectful of source and acknowledge the real intent of what you're doing, because it's just not going to be as correct, and your predictions are going to really fail.
Awesome. Here's the next question from Justin, which is, what about Neptune Pisces regarding clouded judgment? I understand the idea of looking at the visual representation and basing the description off of that, but how does that translate into the energy of Aquarius, as well as when you apply that concept to their signs? I mean, I guess he's just wondering about sort of how you build Neptune into Aquarius when we were having that Aquarius
We don't
dialogue.
do that in Vedic astrology. Traditionally, we don't use outer planets.
Okay, now Arthur had a really funny comment, which was, does Aries and Vedic go into things ass first? Because, you were talking about... Sorry, Arthur's really funny. We just said like that.
I'm not sure how to answer that. But
okay, we'll move on.
Okay. So what I wanted to say, how much time do we have, Danny?
I've got two more questions, and then we'll go.
Okay, let's do I want to do an example to show people live how the two can be used, but let's do the questions first.
I think this is Carol, but her name is Brunch with Aya. Little Mercury retrograde moment. She wants to know about how the two different systems deal with the moon differently. It's such an expansive question.
That's a huge topic. One of the mythologies in Vedic astrology is that the moon, they're all male, masculine figures, but like the moon and Venus are masculine, but they have a feminine result. They look feminine, or they dress as feminine, which has interesting consequences if you think about it. But in ancient cultures, were not squeamish as we are today about certain things. But the moon was seen as one of the mythologies, the moon went and eloped or kidnapped the wife of Jupiter and had an illicit child called Mercury. Now that is this is why people say they read the Veda, there's nothing there. How are you reading the Veda? Just like Isaac Newton took the Greek mythologies and figured out their alchemical formulae for metal alloys. Okay, that's not explicitly written in the mythologies. So likewise, that mythology of the moon going and kidnapping and raping Jupiter's, or having consensual sex with Jupiter's wife and producing Mercury as an illicit child, if you think about the paradigm that we're talking about, the moon in the night sky is going across and meeting all these constellations. So the moon has quite an appetite about him. which is something that is reflected in the Western tradition in terms of the vegetative mind and all that, okay? The acquisitive nature of the moon is similar. So that's a similar point between the two. Yes, I will say that. Then Mercury, Jupiter's wife is called Tara, which means star. So that's interesting. So the moon Jupiter is holding the starlight because it is sattva in the system. It is the equilibrium in the system, okay? Jupiter's wife is the starlight, and the moon takes that starlight, sees it, translates it, which is what the moon is doing in the Vedic astrology, and you have the rational thinking mind formed out of that, which is different, okay? And so this is why Jupiter and Mercury have opposing sign rulerships. This is the Vedic astrology reason why. Okay. So how the moon? Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, we could talk about the moon the rest of the time.
Yeah.
I need to bring up Spica again, but Aladdin quickly was wondering: is Spica the creator of the cosmos?
No.
Okay.
It's the creator of the local Sidereal Zodiac. I don't know. That is a philosophy. I don't know how to look at that, because there's also the galactic center, which is in Mula Nakshatra, which is quite destructive in nature, because that is where we're all going to end up one day. Yeah, sure. I mean, I can go with that. It is the creator of the cosmic, yeah, sure, paradigm.
Gemini Brett wrote sort of a comment that has a few interesting questions in it. So I'm just going to read it out, and then you can just sort of respond to it. And then after that, several people were asking about the Syria thing. So maybe we can look at his question, and then we can close with the Syria example, if that's what you want to look at.
Okay.
So amazing presentation, Theo. Thank you. This is clearly more of a comment than a question, but I believe what you're tapping into is that the tropical zodiac is not about the sun, but rather about the earth. Sidereal has no issue with the northern and southern hemispheres, but tropical clearly does if considered seasonal, because tropical does work for both hemispheres. It is not seasonal, but rather directional.
Correct.
So I guess he's just wondering about the question of directions and seasons and hemispheres and sort of how you engage with those questions.
Yeah, the directional astrology is this has implication in astrolocality techniques in Jyotish, because nakshatras, based upon which planets are blocking their respective starlight, the nakshatras or lunar mansions have aspects to each other. Now, that's something that is unheard of in other kinds of astrology. So it is, let me just say something about the nakshatras, because there's this. People think the lunar mansions are Indian. They're not, right? The Arabic lunar mansions, there are 28 of them. That's a 360 division into 28, which is 12 degrees, 51 minutes, and I think 26 seconds or something like that, 25. That's fine. The 10th lunar mansion, called Al-Jazab or Al-Jakab, I think, is a man holding a set of scales sitting on a scorpion. The only way that lunar mansion in that part of the sky can combine the symbolism of Libra and Scorpio is from a sidereal context, because that is actually how the constellations are. The claws of the scorpion are the scales of Libra. So, and even the Persian authors say specifically the mansions of the moon are sidereally based, and they list them. So that's one thing to say, but they are not the sidereal nakshatras in Vedic. The sidereal nakshatras in Vedic, the lunar mansions in Vedic, they are primarily 27 of them, so it's 360 divided by 27, which is 13 degrees, 20 minutes of arc for each one, all right? And the nakshatras actually join the moon with the sun. So they join the constellations and the zodiac anyway. But the point to keep in mind, the 28th nakshatra in Vedic astrology is an intercalary nakshatra, which means it is lodged in between two of the 27 nakshatras. It's not another division of the sky. Do you understand? So there are 28 lunar mansions in Arabic tradition, and there are 28 nakshatras also in Vedic, but they're not the same. The 28 nakshatra in Jyotish is added into the 27 in a particular way. So why are there these two systems of nakshatras in Vedic, because the one is a division by 9. So 9 times 3 is 27. That gives you a triangle within a circle from a sacred geometry point of view. We all know what that means, a feminine principle. And the 28 nakshatra system is a division of 4, 4 into 7, which gives you a square within a circle, which is a masculine principle. So that goes into all sorts of health and different contexts of how to use the nakshatras, which we're not going to go into. But just to understand that that is what the system of the lunar dimensions are. They are similar, but they are not the same.
Great.
Right.
2 quick questions, and then we'll end with Syria.
Yes.
Karen just had a quick question about Uranus, Pluto, Vedic astrology, and outer planets. Sorry, these questions are so broad.
No, it's fine, because it's a point of familiarity. You know, people will ask questions about what they know, and that's just how the human intellect is. You can't ask questions about what they don't know. That's just not possible. So, okay, the outer planets. When you study Vedic astrology or Jyotish, you'll quickly understand that the less variables you have, the better it is. Because whereas the tropical system is dealing with different time equations in terms of directions going primary way and secondary way, you know, there are different time equations in tropical. That's the strength, I would say, of the tropical system, because it was essentially calendrical based. So the equations of time in tropical astrology are its strength. In Vedic, we are dividing space. We are taking a fractal approach to the division of space. Okay, so using the outer planets, you don't need them. You really, if you're practicing Jyotish properly, you really don't need them. I promise you, you don't need them. Every chart I've looked at consistently over the last 2 years has been perfectly fine without them. You can still go very deep into the psyche and collective in streams. There are other methods to do that, that people have developed. So it's fine. One system is dealing with time variations, and the other one is dealing with space variations. And that's the nature of awareness. It's the one consciousness of the individual that is modified through space and time through the 2 zodiacs.
Great. Bet was just quickly asking about recommendations for beginners who maybe want to learn more. Is there any sites or books you can suggest quickly?
Okay. Okay. Firstly, I'll have to do a marketing plug here. You know, I am doing an Intro to Vedic Astrology workshop in the month here in Johannesburg, and the recordings of that will be available in a 2-day course later on, which is going to go into a lot more detail with the Kala Chakra and all of that. So those recordings will become available later. But the books I can recommend, there's The Ascendant book by astrologer in the USA, Sam Jeppy. That is very good to get understanding of the differences between the signs. That I would say is a good one. There's also a book by Das Gauravani, but take it with a grain of salt when it comes to the philosophy in the book. But it's good to get a good grip of the different factors of it. There is I can send out, Danny, I can send you a list. I don't have the top of my head, but I can send you a list, and then I guess you can send that to the people, or I can email people if they want to get in touch with me, a list that I've got. I can put together a list. But like I said, in an oral tradition, there's nothing written down. So, yeah, I mean, I'm authorized to share certain information. I've only been studying for such a short time. This is a 10-year course.
Ooh, you're channeling us.
Because it's respecting the lineage, and there's a timing. You know, it's apprenticeship. You had to be a journeyman. You had to go through the fire, so to speak. And I haven't gone through the fire yet. So, sure, I can make a list and send out my. I don't know. Can I share my email address if people want to get in? It's info@spicaastrology.com. So that's just one word, right? Let me just type it out. Yeah, it's actually a 15-year course, but I'm actually doing the 15-year course in 5 years because I'm fast-tracking it. Any other questions that we had, Danny?
I mean, there were a few other ones, but some of those questions I felt like you addressed as you were speaking, so I skipped over them. So
Okay.
If you want to quickly talk about Syria, we've only got 3 minutes left, so maybe.
Right. So, I don't know how to explain this. I think I did talk about Syria. Did people have questions about that? Because I did mention how sidereal Mars was in.
Okay, so we addressed that too.
We did address that. The moon translates starlight. You see, when you read, I think it's Abu Mashar talking about on the stellar rays and all these things, and from a magical point of view, the moon is channeling, and people who do talismanic astrology, speaking about Christopher and Strom and his clique, although they use a tropical zodiac for it, which I'm not really sure why, but anyway, you're channeling starlight from particular lunar mansions. Yes, the moon, as the closest astrological object to us, is a channel for influences. It has rulership and exaltation. It's in a feminine sign, so that is true. It is channeling. It does reflect sunlight as well in Vedic. The phases of the moon are dealt separately to its role in the Nakshatras. Its role in the Nakshatras has a bearing upon the length of life and longevity techniques as the breath of life coming from the stars. And Saturn is the controller for that time. So Saturn says when your time is up, basically. But the quantum of the life is coming from the moon as the archetypal feminine and also connecting to the starlight in that way. The moon phases are dealt from a relationship point of view. How do you relate in relationships? And that's called Tidhi. And there's 30 of them that we use, 30 lunar phases, not just 8. So it's a different. And those 30 relate to the 30th divisional chart, which has to do with diseases and illnesses and things like that. So, because it is all about the body as well as the mind and emotions. So it's quite a in-depth thing. But yeah, that's a short answer to your question.
Well, I have one more question, Danny, before we wrap up. SJ asked a really interesting question in relation to the Syria in regards to a sun being a malefic and its ingress into Aries, and then that's
what you meant. Okay.
And Syria, yes, that's
right. Yes, because the sun Aries is seen in Vedic astrology as the army. The Sagittarius, so the sun, Leo, where the sun is, that is where Leo is, right? So the other fire signs are in triplicity because it has this, they're supporting the sun, right? The Sagittarius is the battlefield as well as the army barracks where the weapons are stored. And Aries is the army itself that is doing the bidding of the sun. That is why the sun is exalted in Aries. And if you think about it from a Vedic astrology point of view, the real royal sign is Aries. The king maker is Aries because it's the army and the one in a modern day context who controls the military industry. They are the real rulers of the world. Forget about presidents and politicians. They're not real leaders of the world. We know that. The principle is that whoever controls the army controls the world. That is how it has always been, and that is how it is. And if Aries is the head, the exaltation of the sun is actually on the head. That is where the crown is put for a king. So the king-making sign is Aries because of this, and golden fleece and all that is connected to this archetype from that point of view. But the sun's ingress into Aries shows, especially around a new moon time, which is not a good time in Vedic astrology for harmony in the world, shows that secret activities of a malefic nature, military nature, through the avenue of Sagittarius, long-distance missiles and all that happened. I guess that covers it, I hope.
I hate to be Saturn, but we're at time.
Great, we love Saturn. Yeah. So if anybody has any questions, you can always message me. Yeah.
I'm sending you a kiss from New York across the ocean to Johannesburg.
Thanks. Great.
Thank you. Hopefully the kiss will go as fast as you're going through your courses.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
Theo
it's
is really
crazy.
active on social media, so I'm sure he can definitely reply to anybody. Like either it's Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I've noticed that he's
Fantastic.
on it.
Brilliant.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep.
He's on it.
Sure.
Thank you so much for this
Yeah.
really
Thanks,
interesting
Aya.
call.
Thanks,
Like,
everyone.
really thorough and like makes you think. It's great.
Yeah, it's good. Expands your mind. Open mind for sure.
Yes.
Cool.
Brooke, are you gonna be
All right. Well, the time has come to say goodbye. Bye. We're gonna sashay away.
Okay. Yes.
Freaking stop.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Theo.
Bye-bye.
Bye.